Marcus Cole had been alone in space for 3 days when everything changed forever. His small mining ship drifted through the asteroid belt, collecting rocks that contained precious metals. And he had no idea that something massive was watching him from the darkness between the stars. He was 42 years old, with gray hair starting to show at his temples and a bad knee that hurt when the weather changed back on Earth. Not that weather mattered out here in the endless black void of space. He had an ex-wife named Sarah, who stopped answering his messages 2 years ago, and a brother in Chicago who he talked to maybe twice a year during holidays. Marcus was nobody special, just another human trying to make enough money to retire someday on a beach somewhere warm. He was eating a protein bar and reading an old book on his tablet when the ship's alarm started screaming. The lights turned red and his coffee cup floated up from the table as the artificial gravity failed. He rushed to the cockpit and looked through the front window, and his heart stopped beating for a moment. A ship larger than anything he had ever seen was right in front of him. It was not human. The design was all wrong, with curves and angles that hurt his eyes to look at, and it glowed with a soft silver light that seemed to come from the metal itself. Before he could even think about running or calling for help, his ship started moving on its own. Pulled forward by some invisible force, his vessel slid into an opening in the giant alien ship, like a small fish being swallowed by a whale. Then everything went dark when Marcus woke up. He was lying on a cold floor made of something that looked like black glass. He sat up slowly, his head pounding, and looked around at a room that was clearly not built for humans. The ceiling was too high, the doorways were too tall and narrow, and strange symbols covered the walls in patterns that made no sense to his eyes. The door opened and Marcus saw them for the first time. Vethrani were tall, almost 8 feet, with silver skin that seemed to shimmer like liquid metal under the lights. Their eyes were large and completely black, without any white part at all, and their fingers were long and thin with an extra joint that humans did not have. 2 of them grabbed Marcus by his arms and lifted him off the ground. Like he weighed nothing at all, they carried him through hallways that twisted and turned in ways that made him dizzy, until they reached a massive chamber filled with hundreds of the silver beings. At the far end of the room, 5 Vethrani sat on tall chairs behind a curved table, made of the same black glass as the floor. These 5 wore robes of deep purple and had golden marks painted on their foreheads. One of them spoke in a language that sounded like wind chimes and breaking ice, and somehow Marcus understood every word, which meant they had put something in his brain while he was unconscious. The speaker said that Marcus had been chosen by the sacred algorithm. The speaker said that his ship had crossed into the selection zone at the exact moment of alignment. Speaker said that he would be the sacrifice for the rite of appeasement, and that this was a great honor. Marcus felt his legs go weak. He asked what they meant by sacrifice, though part of him already knew the terrible answer. They explained it calmly, like teachers explaining simple math to a child every 100 years. When the twin suns of their home world lined up in the sky, the Vethrani Empire offered a sentient being to the void. The sacrifice had to be chosen randomly, without any personal feelings or revenge involved. And Marcus had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Was going to die in 14 days. His first thought was to fight, to scream, to try to run. But then he looked around at the hundreds of powerful aliens surrounding him and knew that would be pointless and stupid. So instead, he took a deep breath and asked them a question. He asked if he could learn about their people before he died. The 5 Vethrani on the council looked at each other with what might have been surprise, though it was hard to read emotions on their silver faces. Most sacrifices, they told him, spent their final days crying or begging or trying to escape or drowning themselves in whatever pleasures were offered. Very few asked questions, but they granted his request. Because the sacred text said the sacrifice should be given whenever they desired during the waiting period, they assigned him a keeper, a young female Vethrani named Cirith, whose job was to watch him and give him whatever he asked for within reason. They moved him to quarters that were surprisingly comfortable, with a bed adjusted to human size and food that tasted strange but kept him. Alavazirith came to his room that first night and stood in the doorway like she was not sure what to make of him. She was shorter than the other Vethrani, only about 7 feet tall, and her silver skin had faint blue marks on her cheeks that he later learned meant she was born in the servant caste. She asked if he wanted anything, and the way she said it made clear she expected him to ask for alcohol or drugs or physical pleasure, the things that most sacrifices requested. Instead, he asked her to sit down and talk with him. She stood there for a long moment, her black eyes unreadable, before finally sitting on a chair across from his bed. He asked her to tell him about herself. He asked her to tell him about her world. He asked her to explain why her people did this terrible thing. Cirith did not answer most of his questions that first night. She seemed confused by him, almost annoyed, like he was a puzzle she could not solve. But she came back the next day and the day after that, and slowly she started to open up. Marcus learned that she had worked her entire life to escape the servant caste, fighting against a system that wanted to keep her in her place. He learned that she secretly thought the rite of appeasement was wrong, but she participated anyway because it was tradition and because refusing would mean losing everything she had worked for. He learned that she was lonely in a way that he understood very well, because he had been lonely for most of his adult life too. On the 5th day, she asked him a question that had clearly been bothering her. She asked why he cared about any of this when he was going to be dead in 9 more days. Marcus thought about it for a moment before answering. He told her that everyone dies eventually, that death comes for all living things sooner or later. He told her that the only difference between him and anyone else was that he knew exactly when his death would come. He told her that he could spend his final days in fear and misery, or he could spend them learning something new and maybe making a friend. He chose to learn. He chose to connect. He chose to be human until the very end. Cirith stared at him for a long time after he said this, and he thought he saw something change in her dark eyes. She did not say anything, but when she left that night, she promised to come back tomorrow with answers to all his questions. Marcus lay in his bed after she was gone, looking up at the strange alien ceiling, thinking about death and meaning and the strange turns that life could take. He was afraid. Of course he was afraid. But underneath the fear was something else. It was curiosity. It was the simple human need to understand. It would change everything. Cirith kept her promise and came back the next day with stories. She sat in the chair across from Marcus and told him things that no sacrifice had ever cared to know. Before she told him about the beginning of her people, how the Vethrani had evolved on a planet called Vethra Prime that orbited 2 suns, one golden and one pale blue. The twin suns created strange seasons that lasted for decades, and the Vethrani had learned to survive by being patient and strong and working together. As one united society, they built cities that floated in the clouds to escape the flooding that happened. Every 50 years, they created art and music and poetry that was famous across the entire galaxy. They developed technology that humans could not even imagine, including ships that could bend space itself to travel between stars in days instead of centuries. But then the war came. Marcus leaned forward as Cirith told him about the Keth Dominion, another alien empire that wanted the same planets and resources that the Vethrani needed to survive. The war lasted for almost 1,000 years and killed billions of beings on both sides. Entire planets were burned, to ash and left floating dead in the cold of space. Aerith's voice grew quiet as she described the final battle, when the Vethrani used a weapon so terrible that it cracked the Keth home world in half. The Vethrani won the war, but the victory felt empty and wrong. They had become monsters to defeat monsters, and they did not know how to live with what they had done. And then came the plague. Nobody knew where it came from, whether it was a natural disease or something the dying Keth had created as a final revenge. It spread through the Vethrani population like fire through dry grass, killing millions in the first year alone. The doctors could not stop it. The scientists could not understand it. The people were dying, and there was nothing anyone could do. That was when the rite of appeasement began. A priest named Vorthan the Grey stood before the terrified survivors and told them that the universe itself was punishing them for the war. He said that the void, the empty space between stars, was actually a living god that demanded payment for all the death the Vethrani had caused. He said that they must offer a sacrifice every 100 years, a sentient being chosen at random to show the void that they were sorry for what they had done. The people believed him because they were desperate and scared and needed something to believe in. And then something strange happened. The plague stopped. Nobody could explain why, but within a year of the first sacrifice, the disease simply vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared. This seemed like proof that Vorthan was right, that the void was real and the rite was working. So they continued the tradition, year after year, century after century, until it became so deep in their culture that questioning it was almost impossible. Marcus listened to all of this with his full attention, asking questions when he did not understand something, piecing together the history of an entire civilization in his mind. He asked Cirith what happened to the Keth Dominion after the war. She told him that a few million Keth survived on colony worlds, but they were broken and scattered and no longer a threat to anyone. She told him that some Vethrani felt guilty about this and sent aid to the surviving Keth, while others thought they should have finished the job completely. She told him that this argument still divided her people today. Thousands of years later, Marcus asked about the current emperor, and Cirith looked around nervously before answering in a lower voice. The emperor was very old, she said, older than any Vethrani in recorded history. He had ruled for almost 400 years, and his body was failing. Despite all their advanced medicine, he had 3 children who would fight for the throne. When he died, the oldest was Crown Prince Velith, who was cold and logical and believed that strength was the only thing that mattered in the universe. The middle child was Princess Sithara, who was beautiful and charming on the outside, but cruel and ambitious underneath. The youngest was Prince Kellen, who was different from his siblings in ways that made the court nervous. Kellen asked questions that princes were not supposed to ask. Kellen showed mercy when tradition demanded harshness. Kellen had once spoken publicly against the rite of appeasement and had been silenced by his father before he could say more. Marcus found himself very interested in this youngest prince. He asked Cirith to tell him more, but she shook her head and said she had already said too much about the royal family. Instead, she asked Marcus a question that surprised him. She asked about Earth and about humans and what his life had been like before he was captured. Marcus realized that no one had ever asked her about her own curiosity, so no one knew that she was just as hungry to learn as he was. He told her about Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests and cities full of millions of people all living on top of each other. He told her about his childhood in a small town in Ohio, where he used to catch fireflies in jars during summer evenings. He told her about his father who worked in a factory and his mother who taught elementary school and his brother Daniel who was always getting into trouble. He told her about falling in love with Sarah in college and getting married too young, and watching the relationship slowly fall apart over 15 years until one day she told him she did not love him anymore, and there was nothing left to save. He told her about leaving Earth after the divorce because there was nothing keeping him there, about taking a job on a mining ship because the silence of space felt better than the noise of his. Memoria's Rith listened to all of this without interrupting, her black eyes reflecting the soft light of the room when he finished. She said something that caught him off guard. She said that his life sounded lonely but also beautiful in a way she had not expected. She said that humans were strange creatures who seemed to find meaning in small moments that her people would overlook. She said that she was beginning to understand why he wanted to spend his final days learning instead of escaping into pleasure. Marcus smiled at her, the first real smile he had smiled since being captured. He told her that he was beginning to understand her too. He told her that she was not like the other Vethrani he had met, that there was something different about her, something questioning and alive. She looked away quickly when he said this, and he wondered if her silver skin could blush. They talked for many more hours that day, trading stories and memories and small pieces of themselves. By the time Sirith left that night, Marcus felt something he had not expected to feel in this place. He felt a connection, a friendship forming against all odds between two very different beings. He only had 8 days left to live, but for the first time since his capture, he did not feel completely alone. He lay in his bed and thought about everything he had learned. He thought about the war and the plague, and the right. He thought about how fear could make people believe in things that might not be true. He thought about Prince Kellen and his dangerous questions, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a plan began to take shape. It was not a plan to escape, because he knew escape was impossible. It was something else entirely. It was a question that needed to be asked in front of everyone who had the power to answer it. Marcus did not know if his question would change anything. He did not know if anyone would listen to a human who was about to die, but he knew that he had to try. He owed that much to himself. He owed that much to Sirith, owed that much to every being who had been sacrificed to the void for the past 10,000 years. The question was forming in his mind, growing clearer with each passing hour. He had 8 days to make it perfect. He had 8 days to find the courage to speak it out loud, and then he would stand before the entire Vethrani court and ask them something they had never been asked before. The days passed faster than Marcus expected them to pass. Each morning Sirith came to his room and they talked for hours about everything under the twin suns. She brought him books from the Vethrani library, texts translated into his language that explained their philosophy and history and science. He read about their mathematicians who had solved problems that humans had not even discovered yet. He read about their poets who wrote verses so beautiful that other species wept when they heard them, even without understanding the words. He read about their scientists who had proven thousands of years ago that the void was not a god at all, but simply empty space, cold and dark and completely indifferent to the lives of the beings who lived among the stars. This last part interested Marcus the most. The science was clear and had been clear for 6,000 years. The void could not think or feel or want anything. The void could not be pleased or angered. The void was just nothing, the absence of matter, the space between things, and yet the rite of appeasement continued, and yet people kept dying on the 10th day. Sirith told him about the presentation of the Chosen. It was a ceremony that happened the day before the sacrifice, where the person who would die was brought before the entire royal court to receive the sacred blade and speak the words of gratitude. These words had been spoken by every sacrifice for 100 centuries, They thanked the Vethrani for the honor of being chosen. They thanked the Void for accepting their life as payment. They knelt and bowed their head and accepted their death with what was supposed to be peace and joy. Marcus listened to all of this and said nothing. But inside his mind, the question was growing sharper and more. Dangaru Sirith seemed to sense that something was different about him in those final days. She asked him what he was thinking about, and he told her he was thinking about questions and the power they had to change things. She warned him not to do anything foolish at the ceremony. She warned him that if he tried to escape or fight, the guards would kill him immediately, and his death would be painful. Instead of quick, she warned him that the Emperor did not tolerate disrespect in his court. Marcus looked at her with calm eyes and told her that he was not planning to escape or fight. He was planning to ask a question. Sirith went very still. When he said this, she asked what question, and Marcus shook his head and said he could not tell her because he did not want her to get in trouble for knowing, but he asked her to trust him. He asked her to believe that he was not trying to cause chaos or pain. He asked her to remember everything she had told him about her own doubts about the right. Sirith was quiet for a long time after this. Finally, she nodded and squeezed his hand with her long silver fingers and told him that she would be watching from the crowd and that whatever happened, she was glad she had known him. The 13th day arrived, and Marcus was dressed in the white robes that all sacrifices wore. 2 guards came to his room and escorted him through the long hallways of the ship toward the great chamber where the ceremony would take place. The hallways were lined with Vethrani who had come to see the sacrifice walk to his doom. Some of them looked at him with pity, some looked at him with religious awe, some looked at him with complete indifference, like he was already dead and not worth thinking about. Marcus walked with his head held high and his back straight. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat, but he kept his face calm and his steps steady. The doors of the great chamber opened and Marcus felt his breath catch in his chest. The room was enormous, carved from living crystal that seemed to glow from within with soft rainbow light. The walls sang with harmonic frequencies that he could feel vibrating in his bones. 10,000 Vethrani filled the galleries that rose up on all sides. Their silver faces turned toward him like fields of strange flowers. At the far end of the chamber, on a raised platform, sat the Emperor on a throne made of frozen starlight. He was impossibly old, his silver skin thin and papery, his black eyes clouded with age but still sharp with intelligence. To his right sat Crown Prince Velith, tall and cold and perfect, with a face that showed no emotion at all. To his left sat Princess Sathara, beautiful in the way that a blade is beautiful, with a smile that did not reach her eyes, and in the shadows behind the throne stood Prince Kellan, younger than his siblings, with something in his posture that looked almost like guilt. The high priest stood at the center of the platform, holding the ceremonial blade in his hands. He was dressed in robes of pure white covered with golden symbols, and his voice boomed through the chamber as he began the ritual words that had been spoken. For 10,000 years, he spoke of the void and its hunger. He spoke of the war and the plague, and the debt that must be paid. He spoke of the sacred algorithm that had chosen Marcus Cole to be the vessel of appeasement. Then he turned to Marcus and commanded him to kneel and receive the blade. This was the moment. This was the breath between what had always been and what might be. Different. Marcus did not kneel. A gasp rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. The high priest's eyes widened and he repeated the command, his voice sharp with warning. Marcus remained standing. The silence that fell over the chamber was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat echoing off the crystal walls. He looked up at the Emperor and spoke in a clear voice that carried to every corner of the massive room. He said that he meant no disrespect to the Emperor, or his people. He said that he understood the tradition, and the history and the reasons behind the right. He said that he was not asking to be spared or trying to escape his fate. He said that he only had one question, and he asked if the emperor would permit him to speak it before he died. The high priest was already calling for the guards, his face twisted with fury at this break from tradition. But the emperor raised one thin hand, and everyone in the chamber went silent. Old ruler looked down at Marcus with his clouded eyes, and something passed across his ancient face that might have been curiosity or might have been something else. Entirely, the emperor said that in 10,000 years, no sacrifice had ever asked to speak. The emperor said that this human was either very brave or very foolish. The emperor said that he would hear the question. Marcus felt the weight of 10,000 years pressing down on him. He felt the eyes of 10,000 Vethrani watching his every breath. He felt the moment stretching out like a rubber band pulled too tight, ready to snap into whatever came next. He took a deep breath and began to speak. He spoke slowly and clearly, choosing each word with care, knowing that what he said in the next few minutes might matter more than anything else he had ever said in his entire life. The question was ready. The court was waiting, and Marcus Cole, a nobody from nowhere, was about to challenge an empire. Marcus looked around the great chamber at all the silver faces watching him, saw curiosity and anger and fear and confusion in those alien eyes. He saw Cirith in the crowd, her hands clasped tightly together, her face pale with worry. He saw Prince Callan lean forward in the shadows behind the throne, his expression intense and focused, and Marcus began to speak. He told them that he had spent the last 13 days learning about their people. He told them that he had read their history and studied their science and tried to understand who they were and why they did what they did. He told them that he had come to admire many things about the Vethrani, their art and their music and their courage during the terrible war. He told them that he had also come to understand the fear that lived at the heart of their civilization, the guilt that had haunted them for thousands of years. The chamber was completely silent as he spoke. Even the high priest had stopped his angry muttering and was listening. Marcus said that he understood why the rite of appeasement had started after the war and the plague. He said that people who had suffered so much needed something to believe in, something to hold on to, something that told them they could make things right again. He said that the first sacrifice must have felt like hope to a dying people, but then his voice grew stronger, and he asked them to remember what their own scientists had proven 6,000 years ago. He asked them to remember that the void was not a god. He asked them to remember that empty space could not think or feel or be appeased by the death of a living being. He looked directly at the emperor as he said this, and the old ruler did not look away. Marcus said that he had read the scientific texts himself, the ones that proved beyond any doubt that the void was nothing more than the absence of matter. He said that these texts were still in their libraries, still taught in their schools, still accepted as basic truth by every educated Vethranian, yet the rite continued, and yet beings kept dying for something that everyone knew was not real. His voice echoed through the crystal chamber as he asked his question. If the void is not a god, he asked, then what are you really sacrificing to if the void cannot be appeased? He asked, then what is the rite actually for if you have known the truth for 6,000 years? He asked, then why have you kept killing? The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing down on everyone in the room. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even seemed to breathe. Then Crown Prince Velith stood up from his seat beside the emperor, and his cold voice cut through the silence like a blade. He said that the human was speaking nonsense, said that the rite was sacred tradition and did not need to be justified or explained. He said that the guards should take the sacrifice away and prepare him for execution immediately, but before anyone could move. Another voice spoke up. It was Prince Callan, stepping out of the shadows behind the throne. His young face pale but determined, he said that the human had asked a fair question and deserved a fair answer. He said that he had been asking himself the same question for years and had been silenced. Every time he tried to speak, he said that maybe it was time to finally say the truth out loud. Princess Sithara hissed at her younger brother to be silent, but Callan ignored her. He walked to the edge of the platform and looked out at the assembled nobles with eyes that burned with something that might have been courage or might have been desperation. He said that they all knew the answer to the humans' question, even if they were afraid to admit. I said that the right had never been about appeasing the void. He said that the right was about appeasing themselves. His words hit the crowd like a shockwave, and suddenly everyone was talking it on. Sakil raised his voice and continued speaking over the chaos. He said that the Vethrani had done terrible things during the war, things that still haunted them as a people. He said that the plague had felt like punishment from the universe, and maybe in some ways they had wanted to be punished. He said that the right gave them a way to pay for their guilt without actually having to face it or change anything about themselves. Each sacrifice was a small death that let them pretend they were making things right. Each sacrifice was a way to quiet the voice inside that told them they had become monsters. Each sacrifice let them go back to their comfortable lives and forget about the millions of Kath they had killed and the weapon that had cracked the world in half. But here was the terrible truth. Callan said, his voice shaking with emotion, the guilt never went away. No amount of sacrifices could erase what they had done. All the right really accomplished was adding more death to a universe that had already seen too much. The chamber erupted into chaos. Some nobles were shouting in agreement with Callan. Others were demanding he be arrested for blasphemy. The high priest was practically foaming at the mouth, screaming that this was all the humans' fault for poisoning the young prince's mind. Through all of this, Marcus stood perfectly still and watched the emperor. The old ruler had not moved or spoken since Callan began his speech. His ancient eyes were fixed on some distant point that only he could see, and his thin hands gripped the arms of his star-like throne so tightly that Marcus thought the crystal might crack. Finally, the emperor raised his hand and the chamber went silent again. When he spoke, his voice was soft and tired, the voice of someone carrying a weight that had grown too heavy to bear. He said that he had been emperor for almost 400 years. He said that he had ordered the execution of 40 sacrifices during his reign. Said that he had always told himself it was necessary, that it was tradition, that it was what his people needed. But now, hearing the question spoken out loud by a human who was about to die for no reason, he could not hide from the truth anymore. His son was right. They were not appeasing the void. They were running from themselves. They were killing innocent beings to avoid looking in the mirror and seeing what they had become. A single tear rolled down the emperor's silver cheek, leaving a trail like liquid mercury on his papery skin. He looked at Marcus, and something passed between them. Two old, tired beings who understood each other in that moment, even though they came from different worlds. The emperor said that he could not undo 10,000 years of history with a single decision. He said that changing something this deep in their culture would take time and struggle and might tear his empire apart. But he also said that he was old and dying and had nothing left to lose except his honor, and his honor demanded that he finally do what was right. He turned to the high priest and commanded that the execution be postponed indefinitely. The high priest staggered. Like he had been physically struck, he tried to protest, to argue, to quote the sacred texts. But the emperor silenced him with a look that reminded everyone in the chamber that this ancient being was still the most powerful person in the galaxy. The emperor stood up from his throne, and even though his body was frail and bent with age, in that moment he looked like the warrior he had been 400 years ago. He declared that the right of appeasement would be reviewed by a council of scientists and philosophers, and ordinary citizens. He declared that until the review was complete, no more sacrifices would be made. He declared that the human Marcus Cole would be treated as a guest of the Empire and given safe passage wherever he wished to go. The crowd erupted again. But this time, there was more hope than chaos in the noise. Somewhere in the galleries, Cirith was crying with relief, her silver tears matching the ones on the Emperor's face. Prince Kalan walked down from the platform and stood before Marcus, looking at him with something like wonder. He said that he had been trying to ask that question for years, but had never found the courage. He said that sometimes it took an outsider to see what those on the inside had become blind to. He said that Marcus had done something that might change the future of an entire civilization. Marcus shook his head and said that all he had done was ask a question. The change would come from the Vethrani themselves, from people like Kalan and Cirith, who had already known the truth, but needed someone to speak it out loud. Kalan smiled, and for the first time Marcus saw hope on a Vethrani face. The question had been asked, the answer had been heard, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night after the ceremony, Marcus sat alone in his room and waited for whatever would come next. He had not expected to survive. He had prepared himself to die after asking his question, assuming that the emperor would be too proud or too afraid to listen. But instead, the old ruler had surprised everyone, including himself. Cirith came to his room late that night. After most of the ship had gone quiet, her eyes were red from crying, and she threw her arms around him in a hug that was both awkward and wonderful. Two different species, trying to figure out how to hold each other. She told him that what he had done in the chamber was the bravest thing she had ever seen. She told him that the whole Empire was talking about the human who had asked the question that nobody else would ask. She told him that some people were angry and wanted him dead, but many more were grateful and amazed. Marcus asked her what would happen now. Cirith said that nobody really knew. She said that the Emperor's decision to postpone the rite had thrown everything into chaos. The High Priest was gathering supporters who wanted to continue the tradition no matter what. Crown Prince Valet was furious and had locked himself in his quarters, refusing to speak to anyone. Princess Sithar was already scheming, trying to find a way to use the situation to her advantage only. Prince Kellan seemed genuinely happy, moving through the ship like a man who had been freed from chains he had worn his entire life. The review council had been formed and would begin meeting in the morning. Scientists and philosophers from across the Empire had been summoned to participate for the first time in 10,000 years. The rite of appeasement would be examined with clear eyes. Marcus asked Cirith what she thought would happen. She was quiet for a long moment before answering. She said that the rite would probably be abolished eventually. Maybe not tomorrow or next month, but someday. She said that the Emperor's decision had broken something that could not be put back together. She said that once people were allowed to question something, they never stopped questioning it. But she also warned him that change was dangerous, especially change this big. She said that there would be resistance and anger, and maybe even violence before things got better. She said that some people loved the rite not because they believed in the void, but because they needed something to blame their guilt on. Those people would not give up easily. Marcus nodded and said that change was always hard, on Earth and everywhere else. He said that the important thing was that the conversation had started. He said that once a door was opened, it could never be completely closed again. The next morning, the Emperor himself came to Marcus's room. It was the first time a Vethrani Emperor had ever visited a former sacrifice in private. and the guards outside the door looked like they were about to faint from the shock of it. The Emperor was alone, without advisors or guards, just an old tired being who wanted to talk. He sat down across from Marcus and looked at him with those ancient clouded eyes. He said that he had not slept at all the previous night. He said that he had spent the hours thinking about every sacrifice he had ordered during his reign, trying to remember their faces and their names. He said that he had killed 40 innocent beings during his reign and called it tradition. He said that the weight of that guilt was crushing him now that he had finally allowed himself to feel it. Marcus did not know what to say, so he just listened. The Emperor continued talking, his voice barely above a whisper. He said that he was too old to make up for what he had done. He said that he would be dead within a year, maybe less, and his children would fight over his throne. He said that he hoped Kellen would win, but he knew that hope was probably foolish because Velith was stronger and Sithara was more cunning. But he also said that none of that mattered as much as what happened. To the right, he said that abolishing the sacrifice was the only thing left that he could do to make his life mean something. Reached into his robe and pulled out a small crystal that pulsed with soft inner light. He pressed it into Marcus's hand and told him that this was a seal of imperial passage. He told him that this crystal would grant him safe travel anywhere in the Vethrani Empire. For the rest of his life, he told him that any ship would take him wherever he wanted to go, and any planet would welcome him as an honored guest. Marcus looked at the crystal and felt its warmth against his palm. He thanked the Emperor and asked what he should do now. The old ruler smiled, and for a moment Marcus could see the young warrior he had been 400 years ago, brave and hopeful and not yet broken by the weight of his crown. The Emperor said that Marcus should go home to Earth and tell his people what had happened. The Emperor said that Marcus should live his life and find happiness and maybe even find someone to love. The Emperor said that Marcus had already done enough by asking his question, and now it was time for the Vethrani to figure out the answer themselves. Marcus asked if he would ever be able to come back. The Emperor nodded and said that Marcus would always be welcome among the Vethrani. He said that history would remember Marcus Cole as the human who changed an empire with a single question. Then the Emperor stood and walked to the door, and before he left, he turned back one last time. He said that he was grateful, truly grateful, that the sacred algorithm had chosen Marcus Cole to be the sacrifice. He said that any other being might have accepted their death. Quietly, he said that only Marcus had been brave enough or foolish enough to speak the truth. Then he was gone, and Marcus was alone with his crystal and his thoughts. 3 days later, a Vethrani ship carried Marcus back to Earth. Cirith came with him to say goodbye, standing on the landing platform as the blue planet filled the viewport behind them. She told him that she was going to join the Review Council and fight for abolition of the right. She told him that she had finally found the courage to be what she had always wanted to be. She told him that he had given her that courage, and she would never forget him. Marcus hugged her one more time and told her that he believed in her. He told her that she was going to change the world. He told her that someday, when the right was gone and the Vethrani were free from their guilt, she would know that she had helped make it happen. Then he walked onto the shuttle that would take him home, and he did not look back because he knew that if he did, he might not be able to leave Marcus, return to Earth a different man than he had left. He tried to go back to mining asteroids, but it felt empty and small after what he had experienced, so instead he became something he had never expected to become. He became a speaker, a teacher, a bridge between species. He traveled to colonies and space stations and university halls, telling the story of what had happened to him among the Vethrani. He told people about Cirith and Kellen and the old Emperor who had found his conscience at the end of his life. He told them about the power of questions to change things that seemed impossible to change. 3 years after Marcus returned to Earth, he received a message from Sirith. Right of appeasement had been formally abolished by the new emperor. Callan I, the old emperor, had died peacefully in his sleep, and Callan had defeated his siblings in the struggle for the throne. The last sacrifice had been Marcus himself, and there would never be Anathurcerith had become the official historian of the abolition, writing the story of how a human miner had challenged 10,000 years of tradition with nothing but a simple question. She asked Marcus to come back to Vethra Prime for the celebrations. She asked him to stand beside her as the Empire recognized what he had done. She asked him to see with his own eyes the change that his courage had created. Marcus went. Of course, he stood on a stage in front of millions of Vethrani, next to Sirith and Emperor Callan, and he listened as they thanked him for his bravery. But when they asked him to speak, he kept his words simple. He said that he was not a hero. He said that he was just a man who had asked a question that needed to be asked. He said that anyone could have done what he did, and that was exactly the point. The real heroes, he said, were the Vethrani who had listened. The real heroes were the ones who had been brave enough to change. The real heroes were people like Sirith and Callan who had carried the question forward after he was gone. He said that every being had the power to change the world, not with weapons or wealth, but with the simple courage to speak the truth. Then he stepped off the stage and hugged Sirith, and for a moment the two of them were not alien and human, but just friends who had been through something remarkable together. Marcus Cole lived for another 32 years after that day. He never considered himself special. He never took credit for what happened. Whenever anyone called him a hero, he would shake his head and smile and say the same thing. He would say that all he did was ask a question, and then he would remind them that asking the right question at the right time is something anyone can do. It just takes someone willing to try.